Alright, so, Curse Mountain. This is a bit of a frustrating game to really talk about, because on the one hand, this very much categorizes itself as a survival horror game. It's listed basically everywhere under that category, and that kind of rubs shoulders with Resident Evil, Dino Crisis, Alone in the Dark. And yet, while it definitely accomplishes the horror aspect, I would argue, in terms of tone and storytelling, the survival part I don't really think applies. I'll dig into that a little bit as we go on, but up front, as like part of the spoiler-free review, Curse Mountain feels a bit more like endurance horror. There is no asset management, there is no sense of whether or not you're taking a risk by doing X rather than Y. It is a very distinctly linear experience, and while it works, and maybe it does drag in the third act, it is otherwise very competently designed and does shepherd you through most of your encounters quite efficiently. It's just that it doesn't feel like a survival horror game. It feels like maybe action horror, or even just straight up action adventure. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean the game is bad. In fact, it's actually got quite a lot going for it. In fact, one of the things that I think drew me to Curse Mountain in the first place was the fact that the developers, Sproing and Deep Silver Vienna, and this is I think the first time that Deep Silver actually got directly involved in the production of one of their games, did a huge amount of research into Tibetan and Buddhist philosophy and religion and folklore, all of which actually ties into the gameplay and the story really well. It's one of those rare times when a survival horror game goes into more kind of mythos kind of stuff, more spiritual stuff, and doesn't just go for arse pulls. It actually ties everything back into the story, explains what's going on, even if it is a bit over-reliant on text logs here and there, but it is very well thought out, and it doesn't feel like it's just a very basic template with a bunch of this research splatted onto it. It actually feels like, well, we want to make a game about X. What kind of stuff would complement that? What kind of tones, what kind of bits of information, bits of philosophy would help us deliver this kind of experience? And I have to really respect that. It's just that it never necessarily comes together in the kind of cohesive way that slightly more loose with the truth games can be. I mean, Resident Evil is kind of, at this point, legendary for just taking such flagrant disregard for the way that physics and biology and everything works. People are just going to go, yeah, but, gigantic floppy thing with eyeballs and tentacles everywhere. Whereas Curse Mountain does the work, but kind of robs itself of the spectacle at the same time. But again, this will be a bit more spoiler-free. This is the spoiler-free bit, and we'll go into the more spoilery bit a bit later. As whether or not I recommend this, I mean, it's a bastard and a half to find. It was originally made for the Wii, and it did see release on the Microsoft Windows Game Store, but it's not on there anymore, which is kind of a kick in the teeth. As far as I'm aware, you can find ISOs of it which do work totally fine on Windows 10 with absolutely zero tweaking. I mean, I ran this in 1080p straight off the install, no questions asked. So I can only imagine it's some kind of licensing issue. Maybe Microsoft is just like holding on to it and won't let Steam or GOG get their hands on it. I mean, if Night Dive could get their hands on this game and maybe do like a proper HD remaster, this would really be a popular game, I think. Even though maybe it's not quite full-blown survival horror, just the stuff they do with it and the kind of achievements they make graphically with such limited resources are quite impressive, even for the Wii. But in terms of actually hunting down a physical copy of this, unless you're willing to pay like collector's prices, I can't in all good honesty actually recommend that. If you're going through like CEX and you've got a Wii and you see a copy of Curse Mountain for like a $5, give it a go. You'll probably enjoy it. Who knows? If you find a PC copy, I mean, if you can find it for a $5, whack it on eBay and you'll probably sell it for about fucking 50. But yeah, this feels like a game that's definitely worth experiencing, more because of the development of the game and the way in which they've actually tied their research into the way the game plays. But as a standalone experience, in terms of a memorable experience, but anyway, that's the 5 minutes of review. I will give people about 5 seconds just to fuck off before I start spoiling everything in goddamn sight. Alright, hopefully you're pissed off. Right. So, Curse Mountain, from the ground up, very rarely strays beyond competent. Some of that is due to lack of design quality, some of that is due to limitations of the hardware, some of it is just that there was a lot of effort put in one place, but it doesn't knock on to anything else regarding the game. I suppose ground up we should really talk about the big elephant in the room, the big low resolution elephant in the room. This game was made for the Wii, and it fucking suffers for it as far as I'm concerned. So basically, because of the Wii's limitations, graphically, you can kind of see there's kind of a big uncanny valley jump between the detail on the player models. Eric Simmons, your main character, is pretty... I mean, yeah, he looks fine. He looks absolutely fine, but when you compare him to the textures around you, it's like going from 720p to like 480. There is that distinct clunk as the graphical quality just slides downhill. And again, I'm not the kind of person who genuinely like marks a game against how bad its graphics are. Like, I'm playing Dusk at the moment, and holy shit, it's gorgeous, I love it, and it's incredibly low res, and it doesn't matter because that works, but because there is that disparity between the quality of certain models compared to the quality of other ones, like there are bits where you look out to the skybox and see the distant mountains, and you can see how horribly distorted and just gross those textures are, and it's kind of sad. It almost feels like the game was intended to try and go for something a lot more photorealistic, and then the Wii hardware kind of kiboshed a lot of that, whereas if it had been developed for just the PC up front, then maybe it would have had a bit more room to maneuver. That's probably why my thought of like Night Dive doing an HD remaster would just allow the game to express what it was trying to do, but just couldn't. And I'm not bashing on the Wii here, and there is actually another reason why I'm talking about the Wii, which is this game does use motion controls. And to the game's credit, this is actually a nice little bit where the background of the game, the whole research in terms of Buddhist beliefs and Tibetan mythology, does tie into the actual gameplay hook. But the basic loop of the game is that you will go to a location, find someone who is going to give you some basic information, then go to the next section, intermittently fighting ghosts in the meantime. When you fight ghosts, you are normally either swinging at them with your axe, which I imagine on the Wii would be like a wiggle, or you would use the attachments on the end to shoot them with. Because this game has weapons, it just doesn't have any ammo pools, so you can kind of see where the survival horror thing is like, I've got a gun with infinite ammo and 4 different variants of it. I don't need to worry about these guys, really. I can just kind of go hog wild. But essentially, when you're fighting the ghosts, you can either smash them to pieces, and being a violent Scotsman, you're probably going to do that quite a lot, but if you want to get rid of them a little bit more quickly, and as a matter of fact, another little tie-in which kind of ruins the survival horror part of this, if you want to regain some health, you can banish them. Now, this is where you weaken them enough to a certain point, then their kind of glowy chakra point is exposed. Sounds vaguely dirty, but fine. And then you blast them and basically perform a banishing mantra in order to send them over back to the Bardo. Which does require you to basically do a quick join the dots puzzle by wiggle, wiggle, wiggle. On the PC, you do it with your mouse. On the Wii, I can only imagine you do it with the wand. And I can actually imagine the Wii being slightly more awkward for that, because every time I played with the Wii, it would always be slightly off-center, so I'd be like, just trying to get it all to fucking work. And yeah, that bit at the very least, I actually read some interviews with the guys behind this, and they did talk about there are parts of kind of Tibetan mythology and Buddhist practices which do kind of dovetail with the idea of motion controls, that whole idea of making gestures. There's a part of the game especially, I think about the midpoint, kind of late Act 2, where you are trying to kind of cycle the remote as you kind of keep in time with this thing, and it gets to the point where the screen is fading out and you're just listening to the rhythm, and I was losing my shit. I fully admit I kind of went a bit mad there, mostly because of the limitations of my mouse mat. I've got a wrist guard, so it means I'm kind of going as I slam my mouse against it, which wasn't too great, but I can imagine just sitting there, dun 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 dun. It's approaching that kind of Zen level of mental clarity where you're just focusing on the rhythm, focusing on the motion, bum bum bum. Really nice, and it didn't feel too forced, and it didn't fail you for it, so credit where credit's due. The game does understand that sometimes something kind of difficult you don't want a fail state for. You just want to be like yeah, you got the idea, just let them keep going. So yeah, in terms of the way that the game is kind of limited by the Wii, it's not terrible, and most of the problems are cosmetic. However, this is going to be a bit of a hark back again, just one major gripe I'm going to have with the entire game. This does kind of lead to the game not being particularly scary. It's got some good jump scares, definitely. At certain points you'll get the woogity boogity boogity of a ghoul just kind of popping up and going at you. But there's never this sense of tension that's generated when you're playing a game that is a proper survival horror, when you've got like 7 bullets in your mag, you're half health, you know there's a healing item in a few rooms back the way you came, but you dodged a bunch of baddies to get there, and it's the case of, do I want to take the risk of dodging them to get the healing item and risk getting killed along the way or wasting ammo, or do I want to soldier forward and just take my fucking chances and hope I get something that will help me out? None of that occurs in Cursed Mountain because it is a sequence of linear fights. You will move from point A to point B. Very often the game will actually seal you in an area while you fight your enemies, and frankly, if you didn't have the ability to heal while banishing enemies, this game would actually be a lot more tough, possibly a bit more frustrating, but definitely a lot more of that survival horror side of things, because you then have a finite resource to work with. Unfortunately, because you can heal, and because that in between combats there are healing shrines you can go to burn incense to get more health back, and I believe that actually when you unlock extra segments of your health bar, you heal even more. It got to the point where I wasn't really approaching combat with any level of tension. It was more a case of, oh god, I've got to slog my way through these fuckers now. And that's not the right kind of experience you want. If you want your game to be action-focused, the game needs to be a lot more fluid. The action and movement needs to be a lot more fluid. Or if you want survival horror, you want something where the action is a bit more sporadic, but a lot more tense, a lot more high stakes. Cursed Mountain awkwardly sits in the middle, where it's got a lot of the movement and combat mechanics from survival horror, but a lot of the background kind of health and ammo management mechanics from a straight-up action game where you don't have to worry about those kinds of things. It's more about dealing with the problem in front of you, and it's like taking the worst of both sides. It's like, yes, take the tank controls from Resident Evil and mesh them with the endless levels of ammo from like a bullet hell game, and like, I don't know where to go with this. This is not kind of ramping up the tension at all. But yeah, so I mean, fair enough. I've rambled on about that for long enough. Basically, it's competent and it gets the player moving from A to B. It just doesn't actually give the game any more than the basic fundamentals to work with. So yeah, I suppose the last thing to talk about really is the plot. And again, like this is where the game has done most of its work. It has really, the developers have really tried to figure out a way to tell a story based on something which not a lot of people have done a lot of study on. Very little media is out there about it, and do it respectfully and do it accurately. And honestly, I struggle to think of many games that have actually put this much level of effort into it. If I'm wrong, and there are other games that have done this, please let me know. I'd like to play them as well, because this is one of the major things that drew me towards Cursed Mountain. And for all the shit talking I did while Let's Playing it, I was still very much impressed that they actually explained a great deal very clearly, and then looped it back into the way the game played. Essentially, you are the older of two brothers heading up a mountain to rescue his younger brother, who has apparently, and I'm using the villagers' own words here, raped the mountain chum Alonzo. That does seem to be a bit excessive, but then we got the shit like the rape of Nanking, so yeah, let's not use that word a huge amount. I don't feel comfortable talking about it. But anyway, essentially it causes the mountain goddess to flip her shit and unleash basically everything she's got at everyone indiscriminately all over the mountain. I was kind of curious as to why she decided, you know what, all you people who worship me, fuck you as well, because this one Scottish twat went up a mountain and nicked a terma? Yes, terma, which is like a little MacGuffin box of ancient Tibetan wisdom that is supposed to be opened at a specific time when the world is ready for it. Apparently this terma just contained, you know, the contents of the briefcase in Pulp Fiction or something, but it created weird eldritch shit, and that got the game moving. It's a MacGuffin, basically. And so we go up the mountain, finding various monks and various other survivors who help us work out precisely what's going on. Apart from Yomo Memmo, who is just a psychotic ancient fucking granny who wanted to murder me basically from the get-go, and proceeded to remain around for most of the game, just bellowing at me from the distance. Most of the time when you're climbing ice walls, which is again like in the third act, the game slows down to a fucking crawl. Just having her bellow at you, it feels like it's like kind of speaking in your mind voiceover, but I just like the mental image of while Eric is climbing up this fucking mountain, just Yoma Menmo is about a mile and a half away on the other side of the mountain, just like, hey, white guy, fuck you, here's some wisdom, bitch. It amused me greatly. But anyway, as you go through these locations, and it begins in a more kind of more urban, more industrialized environment because it's the main town at the base of the mountain, and then as you go further up, you start discovering small villages, temples, ancient sites where temples have been but maybe collapsed. You start to see where all that effort has gone in, because I do believe that some of these places are reproduced with incredible levels of high fidelity, and you will, unless you go to fucking Tibet and go to a monastery, you're not really going to get this kind of level of insight. And even the little things, even the little tweaks of set design, even the little ideas of using like the coloured flags to show where you've got to go next, the actual kind of thing that happens in those communities. Such nice little touches that just feel like they are properly representing what was supposed to be there, what is actually there. It does in places feel like the game has to kind of put that on hold to get some more game out of the way, and I suppose at this point, I should probably go into the way the third act kind of shits itself. Essentially, once you go through maybe the second monastery, and this is kind of good way into Act 2, we start opening up a lot more, and unfortunately that also means losing a lot of the actual Buddhist and Tibetan research-based stuff. We got a lot of that out of the way in the beginning, and we explore a lot of it in the second act, but by the time we get to the point where we are ascending to the summit, we really just retreat back again to basic base camps, like metal shacks, and it loses a lot of that character that it had had before, and it's kind of sad, because I would have much rather the game had doubled down and gone much further into the mysticism. There is actually a point where you enter the bardo, and you go into this strange, dark, shattered version of a monastery, and it's very interesting, and it's very abstract, and it worked really well. I felt like I was actually in an alien place, and there was a distinct level of tension because I had no idea what I was supposed to be preparing for. But when it gets to the third act, it's either you're trekking up the side of a mountain, like climbing up ice sheets, or wandering between like old ragged tents and corpses. It became almost interchangeable with any other survival horror you'd set up a mountain, and that's kind of sad, really, because it lost the one major thing that kind of tied me into everything. Beyond the way that the tone does kind of taper off, the plot is there. Funnily enough, the game is actually not afraid to portray the guy we're saving as an absolute prick. Frank is essentially portrayed as a fantastic dickhead, racist, fucking, like, there is a skeptic, and there is a guy who openly mocks people's culture and beliefs, and Frank very much falls into that latter camp. He is a massive arsehole, and very much near the end, I was questioning, am I gonna have to save this guy? Because frankly, I don't give a shit about him. He seems like a real piece of fucking shit. And, funnily enough, credit to the game, the whole idea is that Frank actually learned a lesson, and he's at peace with taking his punishment and reincarnating rather than coming back down the mountain. One could argue that's maybe him escaping from his consequences, but I suppose death is kind of a consequence in of itself. I just wish it hadn't resulted in the deaths of so many other fucking innocent people who had not wanted anything against the fucking mountain in the first place. But oh well. Yeah, really, that's all I've got to say about Cursed Mountain. I mean, it is a game that I would recommend if it's floating around in your near proximity and it's not too expensive. It's worth trying, it's worth experiencing. It's just not the sort of game you're going to be like, oh man, I can't wait to smash through a few more hours of this, but more of a, oh, this has been interesting, yeah, I like what they've done here. It's a case where the project as a whole, when you step back and look at it, is very much interesting and is very much a good kind of source of study. It's a game worth admiring for the context it was made in and the source material it went into and the respect it showed. As a game that you're playing in the heat of the moment, not so much. Anyway, I'm going to call it here because this is damn near 20 minutes and somehow this has actually come out better than this written review I tried to do. But anyway, thank you very much for listening to me ramble, and I will catch you guys later. Have a good one.